when my children were quite small, I couldn't return to teaching because they were too little, and there was no provision then for nurseries. So when the eldest one reached 3, I did manage to get him into Beaches Road Nursery, and I taught at Beaches Road most afternoons, but I taught at the hospital in the morning. I had 2 wards, the boys' ward on the left and the girls' ward on the right, and anybody who was in for more than a week, though I usually was asked to deal with them all, had school lessons. And that was quite fun, really, because I used to have to run from one ward to another. There were usually about 15 children in each ward, so you got 30 in your class, but they were all at different levels, of course. And once or twice, you know, they try to catch you out and get out of it by doing other things and claiming your interest. And we had a group of boys who were in almost for 12 months. So it got that really I was their main teacher. And we used to have quite a bit of fun. We played chess as well as doing other things. But it's quite difficult to teach children who are confined to bed, because those boys had what they call Perth's disease. I don't know whether you've heard of it. It doesn't seem to be quite so prominent these days. It meant that the ball socket, the hip ball socket joint, came out of joint all the time. So they spent a lot of their time in a plaster cast from the waist down. So doing sand play or painting when they were all in bed and trying to keep it in line with matron and sister was sometimes quite a difficult task. She was only happy if they were only doing sums and reading, but if I tried to do anything a bit interesting for them to break the monotony, then we sometimes had a bit of a telling off, but particularly if they spilt paint on the sheets or anything like that. But no, it was a very interesting job. But as I said, I did that for about 3 years, I should think. And that was only mornings, and we went from 9:30 till 11:45. And then they had their lunch. But in the afternoon it was visiting. Fondest memories of working at the hospital? I suppose it was being with the children, teaching in a very different situation to a classroom, managing with, you know, very little equipment, with sometimes with youngsters who would do their best not to do any work, when really I had to get them work for them to school as well, because I had to liaise with their teachers at school, particularly when they were only in, say, for a fortnight or 3 weeks. But we used to keep them in longer in those days, because people now are out after 2 or 3 days, even with the major operations. But then they used to be in quite a lot. I can remember the things that the children came in with, and you don't see nearly as much because things are better managed. And that was children with diabetes. Because in those days it was only insulin that they were controlled with, and you had to keep your eye or your nose on them when you were actually teaching them, because if they were going to have hyper, you could smell pear drops on their breath. And so if you were talking to them or listening to them reading and you recognised this, then you had to get a nurse to sort them out, do something for them. As I said, the boys with Perths were stuck up at the back of the ward, but they always had football favourites, so we used to sometimes compare match results and things like that. And that was it. That was good too. And because I got my own boys, I thought how lucky I was that they weren't in the same position. The staff were always very good. And we had, what's her name, Miss Davis? Yeah, she was the consultant on the ward. And I can remember her. She used to come in and do a ward round.
And she used to walk to the hospital, hadn't she?
She did, and she lived in Newton Road, and you'd see her every lunchtime marching off. She was a tall, slim lady, very impressive person. And I think all the parents and all the children and all the staff were a bit scared of her, but she was a very, very good doctor. She didn't approve of parents. She thought they spoiled the children. And if it had been her way, she would never have had visitors at all, never mind just in the afternoon. But yes, it was a very interesting time. I've been in the hospital myself as well. I was in the gynae ward that we think had been the tramps ward in the old days,
yeah.
hadn't it?
It was the tramps ward.
But the thing I remember about that, I'd had an operation.
Roaches.
And so I'd got stitches. And because I'd had association with the hospital, I was in a side ward, which meant I was on my own. And the heating of that ward, I'm sure you've seen them, were great big black pipes that attached to big radiators. And they went all round the room.
About 6-inch diameter, weren't they?
And the thing was that when you got that sort of heating and plaster, you also got cockroaches. Now, the cleaner in my ward was terrified of these cockroaches. And I remember her coming in one morning and there was a hearty scream and she'd nearly trodden on one. And she was absolutely petrified and stood on the spot. And I, still with stitches, got out of bed, took a dustpan and brush, swept up this cockroach and threw it through the window. So that was a bit of therapy, I'm sure. So I always remember the tramps ward because that's what it had been in the past.
Yeah.
Because the tramps were overnight stayers at the workhouse. But of course, a lot of the buildings were still there for a number of years.